Hey everybody, and welcome to week 3. This week we're going to start part 1, module 2. Um, your course for this week should look something like this. Right now it's hidden, but I'm going to open it up as soon as I finish the video. You have the video that you're watching right now, a link to Networking Academy, and module 2 covers a lot of stuff, so I've split it up to 2 weeks. This week we're just going to do module 2.1 to 2.5. Your graded assignments this week are just screenshots of the labs that you do inside Net Academy. So while you're working in Net Academy, you'll take a screenshot, paste it into Paint or whatever, save it as an image file, and then upload that into Moodle. With that, we'll jump right into it. You'll go into Networking Academy, find one of the labs that's listed. Now, not always. There are several labs that you should take screenshots of and turn in. Pay attention to the numbers of the lab. This one is 2.1.1.6, and I don't know that is. No, that's not one that I'm asking you to turn in, but it is a lab. You should do it. Learn something. When you do take a screenshot, make sure that it includes this lab section on the left, this code section on the right, and this console section where your output will be. This lab here, I guess the reason I'm not having you turn it in is because this is what we did last week. And the lab is simply print hello world, which is always the first assignment in any coding class. So to do these labs, you read the directions over here, and sometimes, especially later on in the course, these directions will be pretty lengthy. It will show you what the expected output is. Make sure your output matches what's expected with any test data that they give you here. But you do your code in this upper right part, hit the play button, and it will run your code, and then you should see the output here in the console. Kind of the same thing that we're doing that you do in PyCharm when you print hello world in your coding area and you get your output in the console. I hope everybody understands that. Just make sure that all 3 of these are visible in your screenshot so that I can see. I could read the lab, make sure you did it right, and see your output in the screen in the same screenshot, and I don't have to go searching around. And that would be awesome. So the rest of this video is meant to supplement the course material in Networking Academy. So I'm just going to kind of go over a few things that we cover in the chapter. So we discussed, I may have mentioned briefly, because you don't know what a function is at this point, but print here is what we call a function. It's a built-in function that Python has built in for you. So they've already hard-coded this into the stuff, so you don't have to think about it. What you write in here, this string that says hello world, is called an argument for that function. That will mean something later. When we start doing our own functions, you define a function and it has to take in some arguments, or it has to take in some data that it's going to then do something with. That's what this is. So this is a function, and this here is an argument. And let me zoom in on that so you can see what I'm talking about. Hopefully, if you're on one monitor and I blow up my screen like this, you should be able to see everything that's going on without having to squint too hard. So you should be familiar with the print function at this point. They cover the escape character. And the escape character is, I guess that's a backslash. Yeah, I'd call that a backslash. Not a forward slash, but a backslash. So that is the escape character. And what that does is there will usually be something that comes directly after it, and the Python interpreter will read it a different way. For instance, we'll do, let's say you're going to print apples and oranges. We can print apples, we can print oranges. So these are called strings. Anything in the quotation mark is a string. And if we run this, it's going to print apples and oranges on two separate lines. But you could do that. You can simplify that into one line, right? And if we do apples, comma, oranges, it'll print apples, oranges on the same line. If we wanted that to appear on another line, we would use the escape character and the N, which is the new line character. I think that has to be inside the quotes. That's why it's looking funny. I'm getting all these red marks. This is another reason I like to use an IDE, because when you get all these red marks, you know something's wrong. So we'll put these inside the quotation mark. And now it looks right. You can see that PyCharm makes the escape character and the new line character orange, so you know it's different. It's not included in the string. And then when you hit enter, oh, no, you can't hit enter. You got to push the button. But you'll see that it prints it on a new line. So apples and oranges. If you want to print a list, you could do this and print a bunch of stuff. Copy the comma. So you could print a bunch of stuff on a bunch of different lines and make it a list. That's good for the new line. So if you'll notice, each time I put a new argument in here, there's a comma. So every time you put an argument in a function, which is in these parentheses, you'll want to separate them with a comma. That's easy enough to know. There is an end keyword that they cover. This. So if you want the end of your stuff to end with something, I never use this again. It's something that's covered in the book. You should know what it does, but I've never used it. So you do an end keyword, and whatever you put in here, whatever string is in this end, will print at the end of your stuff. So here you got apples and oranges, and it ends with a period. There's also a separator keyword, and this obviously it separates what it's printing with a dash or whatever you put in here. So if I run that, you'll see it puts it between the two, but because I have this new line on there, if I take the new line out, run it again, it'll print apples and oranges. And again, you can do that. Let's do. I'll make sure that I separate all these with comma, comma, comma. Nope, that's a period. So if I run this, apples, oranges, you see there's a dash between every one of the arguments. And that's the separator keyword. So if I wanted to do something super cool, as to say, something like this. This is several arguments separated by commas. It's got a separator here and an end. So if I run that, it's going to print programming essentials in. And then if you had something out here, oops. Yeah. Program essentials in Python, separated with the stars, ending with that until the next print statement. So the end ends this statement, and this is a separate print statement altogether. It just kind of puts it on the end. You'll probably see that again. Super simple. but make sure you understand what it's doing. And so that's all you that's the print command. It's pretty simple. What you put in there is what it's going to show on the screen. And it's very valuable because you need to, when you write a program and a user is interacting with it, whether they're entering data, they're going to want feedback. They're asking the program for something every time. So you're going to print something to show the user of your program every time. Well, most of the time. Then we move on to basic operators. But before that, yeah, we'll kind of cover it. Okay, so basic operators, and I'm talking math operators here. You got addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. There's modulus, which I don't know if we'll actually explore that or not, but modulus is like division, but it returns the remainder instead of the actual product of the division. I'm not sure if you'll see that. It's not in any of the assignments this week, but if it comes up again, I'll make sure I cover it a little bit better. If you're interested, look it up. Just Google modulus. It's in every programming language. It's just a thing that sometimes you use. Well, let's talk about variables for a second. So I've been saying, well, let's start here. A variable, what is it? It is, I don't know how to define it other than something that holds a value. So in this case, like when I do a lot of counters, I use the letter I, and then I is equal to 0. And then as the program progresses, I increment that value. So I becomes 1, I becomes 2 as it goes through a loop. You'll see all that later. But the point is here, I is going to equal 0. So if I print I and run that, it'll print 0 because I is 0. The value of I is 0. And a variable can really be anything except a keyword. Variable. You can name it variable if you want to. Oh, I didn't print it, but if I print variable, I wasn't sure if variable is a keyword or not. I print variable and it's 0 because it's equal to 0. Your variables should be descriptive as to the data that it holds, whether it is a counter or whether it is the number of students or whether it is whatever it is, so that you understand what value that variable holds. I get a little bit lazy, so like I use J, K, if I can remember what it does. I don't do that with big programs or something that I intend to work on later. They have to be descriptive, but for demonstration purposes, I'll definitely keep them short. Variables can be lots of different things. So numbers, they can be integers, like I equals 1 or 2 or 3 or 5. That is an integer variable. If J can equal a string, and just like the print, anything that's in quotations is a string. Now, if I put a number in here, like 5, it's not a 5. It is a string value. It will print the number 5 as you and I understand a 5, but it sees it as text instead of an integer, where like this one is an integer. So the difference being, if I wanted to do I plus, let's declare variable total equals I plus J, and then print the total. So in this code, you would, if you're doing it wrong, you would think that I is 5 and J is 5. And so it's going to add the 2. Total should equal 10. So when you hit print the go button, it should print 10. But it says here it cannot print unsupported operand types. You can't add an integer and a string. So if you change J to a regular 5 and then run it, you'll get 10. If you make them both strings, what do you think is going to happen? it prints 55. Why? So this is something, a fancy word you may have heard before. It's called concatenate. Concatenate. Basically, it mushes the two strings together. So it's half a sentence and half a sentence, and it puts them together. You have to make sure you add your own spaces and stuff in the variables, but it smushes them together. So that is not a mathematical, it's still an operand, a basic operator, but it's not doing math at this point. If it's using two strings, it's just going to push them together and concatenate them. So make sure that you use your strings versus integers, or there's another one, there's a float. And a float is basically just a number with a decimal point, some value after it. And if you run this, you'll get 10.0 because your total becomes a float. So Python is a really good language to learn for its simplicity. If you you don't have to declare these variables, and you just watch me change from a string to an integer to a float without telling Python that the variable was a string or an integer or float. Python's smart enough to figure that out on its own. With most of the other programming languages, you are going to have to specify that this is an integer or this is a float. And you'll see that Python doesn't really like that, but it does turn them purple because it recognizes those are keywords. So with Python, you don't have to do that. If you wanted to port your code into like C later, you can use something called Cython. But in order to turn it into proper C code, you have to declare all of your variables, what they are, whether it's an integer, a float, a string, whatever it may be. But Python, luckily, doesn't make us do that. So it's easy, and I like it. Also, you'll notice that the total changed every time. When it could do an operator, when it could add them together, it made an integer. When it concatenated strings, the total variable was a string, and now you're looking at a float, 10.0. So that is good. There are some rules for variable names. For instance, a variable has to start with a letter or an underscore. And I see a lot of developers do that, use an underscore for the variable, but I don't understand why. I just make it a name. It cannot start with a number, and it can only contain alphanumeric characters and underscores, so no parentheses or anything like that. A proper naming convention, and I'm not sure it tells you this in your book, but something that I was always taught is camel case. So if you have a long variable name because you're trying to be descriptive, you want like number of students. So the first thing is not capitalized, and then every word thereafter is capitalized, so you can read number of students. And this is called camel case. This is traditional naming convention, how you do variables. Now, I have seen a lot of other people like to do this, and that's okay too. It's very descriptive. It fits. It's descriptive, and the variable name works. If that's the way you prefer to do it, that's fine. I guess it's personal preference. I just prefer camel case because that's the way I was always taught to do it. But you do you. Let's just kind of go over the operators here. Do I equals 5 and J equals 5 and total, dang it. So we did plus, let's do minus and print total. So try not to insult your intelligence here. We all know what addition subtraction is, but just to illustrate, 5 minus 5, 5 times 5, they all work. Oh, that's supposed to be J. Same thing. 5 divided by 5, 1. So those are your basic operators. Again, there's a modulus. It should be 0, I think. Yeah. So let's do. So it'll be 5 divided by 7. Maybe I should do the other way around. 3. Yeah, so it's like the difference, I guess, modulus. It's more complicated than that, but I'm not going to get into that right now. We talked a bit about variables, and they can be anything. So let's say John has got 3 apples, and Mary has 5 apples, and Adam has 6 apples. We print John, Mary, and Adam. We're not printing their names. Let's add a sep. We're not printing their names, we're printing the values, right? Because John is equal to 3, so it's going to print 3. It doesn't know what John is. It just knows that this is a placeholder for the value here. And then let's say total apples equals John plus Mary plus Adam. We print total apples. We get 14. So it's adding together the numbers here, not the names. That should be pretty clear. Well, let's say we want to do this. We want more than just a text output. We want to tell somebody what that is, because I'm here talking apples. You're like, what? I got 3 apples, whatever, total apples. We got to give a little more output to our users. So we're going to say the total number of apples and then we want to add the number of apples. We can't print, well, let's just try this. Illustrate. We can't print this. This isn't going to work, right? Why? Because we're trying to concatenate a string and an integer. We have to use a little function called string, or str, which will turn this integer into a string and then concatenate it with the rest of that. And I don't know if I can, yeah, you can see my cursor. So if I run this, you'll see the total number of apples is 14. So it recognizes this now as a string. You can do that in reverse too with the int function. Let's see if I have, like, John's stuff is a 3, a 3 string, and then these 2 are integers. If I run that, it's going to error out. It says, hey, I can't add a string and an integer, right? But if I go down here and do int and put John's name in parentheses here, then run the file, I get the same output. So it recognizes here, it says, okay, I have to change this into an integer because it's a string, and then I add it together to get the total apples. Then I come down here and say, okay, well, the output was still an integer, and I got to convert that to a string to concatenate it to number of apples. I hope that makes sense. But that's how variables work and basic operators, and that's fairly simple, I think. And that looks like it concludes up to module 2.5. Your labs will get a little more complicated than that, but not much. You will have to, like, numbers and seconds and that kind of stuff, figure out if you're doing it right. But I want you challenged just a little bit. So if you have any questions, please send me an email. Usually available, and I will usually respond fairly quickly. Those of you who've had me before will know that. So yeah, enjoy the week, and I'll see you next week.